Good morning, everyone. We're looking at, in our third lecture here on the Odyssey. How are you finding it now? You got into it a bit, everyone's got their text, and how are you finding it as a story? Interesting? Anyone captivated by it?
There are some moments.
Yeah, well, there are definitely some moments. If you're struggling with it in any way, you might find, actually, can you turn the light off at the back there just to get the image up on the wall? Just the one closest to you. And just remind everyone, cell phones off, away, etc., says he. So I'll actually follow my own prescription here. Turn this thing off. This is a photo of the Cyclopes and Odysseus here in the sheep, that scene. I'm going to talk about that in a sec. These stories have been a rich repository. They're not just instructive to the Greeks, although, as I said to you, Homer was considered the teacher of all the Greeks, all Hellas, all the Greek city-states, and regarded as the great writer in pretty much any language. So when we come to Virgil in the Roman period, who's the greatest of the Roman authors, he writes epics, and he's implicitly and explicitly bringing to mind these two great works by Homer that we're reading, and the stories that are in them have been a rich repository for later writers. So they're not just interesting in and of themselves, they become stories that others latch onto and bring into their own tales. So the story of Odysseus, a few years back, there was a movie with George Clooney called Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, which is loosely based on this in the sense that the characters are named after this and so forth. And there are epics that are written to this day, including one by the Caribbean poet Derek Walcott called Omeros, which is the Greek name for Homer. And it's about three Caribbean fishermen, Achilles and Agamemnon. I can't remember who the third was. So these stories have been recast, retold, and they are a repository for the entire imagination of the Western world, and not just the Western world. They're that widely known. So when you learn and read these stories, you'll find that later authors will be mentioning episodes in it as if you should know it. And the good thing is now you will know it. Whereas when I went through school, and certainly you will have found yourselves in high school, you're reading contemporary literature, and they might know of these stories, but you haven't even read them. So we're going back to the sources, and it gives you a sense of you're in on the conversation. You're not an outsider. So I think that's one of the benefits of looking at this. But there's more to it than that. And I think we left off last time in Book 6 on the island of the Phaeacians, with Nausicaa having brought her this visitor to the island, Odysseus, to her father. And we learned something about hospitality. Hospitality, which is a universal value of the whole Mediterranean and the ancient Near East as well. So to this day, in countries throughout that area of the world, hospitality is an absolute must. It's not an optional thing. This is what you do if you are a godly person. If you don't do it, you are contemptible. And again, it's a Christian virtue as well, mentioned in Scripture. Because and the reason is that some have entertained angels unawares, probably thinking back to Abraham and the three angelic visitors. But it's a universal value. And it's here in the text, in Homer's text as well, but there are instances when there are departures from that, and this is the most famous of them. And I'll come to that in a second. But that is precisely, remember, just to bring you back to where we were last class, Odysseus has landed on the island of the Phaeacians. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know whether they are barbarians or whether they're civilized people. If they're civilized people, they will treat him with hospitality. Now, the reason he's concerned about this is because something has already happened which would make him extremely anxious, and that is precisely this story. That's in the backdrop. So remember I said there's a story within the story within the story. So Homer's telling a story about Odysseus, and Odysseus is going to tell his own story within that, and he's going to tell the Phaeacians of the 9 years of wanderings that have brought him to this point. So these are not within the narrative, it's just this is the next book. Right, book 1, book 2, book 3, but you have to understand in terms of the chronology, it's taken Odysseus 9 years and then some to get to this point where he's telling them that story, and he's going to tell the Phaeacians of some of the highlights of that, or the lowlights in this case. And the chief one, that one we're going to spend a little bit of time on, at least at the outset, is this landing on the island of this character whose name is Polyphemus, the Cyclopes, who just happens to be the son of Poseidon. But he doesn't know that. He doesn't know where he is, and he doesn't know exactly what the nature of this character is, but because of the way the Cyclops treated him, and because of the way he responded to the Cyclops, he has been delayed 9 years from getting home. Because he blinds the Cyclops, and the Cyclops calls out to his father, and his father is outraged at the treatment of his son, and he's going to keep Odysseus. Even though he can't kill him, because he's fated to get home, he can make him suffer terribly. So it's a crucial passage within the context of it. So let me look very briefly at book 9 here and some of the key sections here. So that begins in our Lattimore translation on page 137, so book 9. And it begins with the framing narrative, which is that he's telling this story to the king. Resourceful Odysseus spoke in turn and answered him, the king, O great Alcinous, preeminent among all people, surely indeed it is a good thing to listen to a singer such as this one before us, who is like the gods in his singing. Now remember, he's just to remind you, he's just heard the story sung by the singer about the Battle of Troy and the Trojan, or the heroes, he being one of them. And he's responded to it with tears. And the king has noticed this and says, okay, tell us your story. And it's talking about the importance of telling stories for preserving memory, among other things, remembering what people have done and important things that have happened. So he says it's a good thing to listen to a singer. Remember, Homer is one of them. Such as this one before us, who is like the gods in his singing. For I think there is no occasion accomplished that is more pleasant than when festivity holds sway among the populace, and the feasters up and down the houses are sitting in order and listening to the singer. And beside them the tables are loaded with bread and meats, and from the mixing bowl the wine steward draws the wine and carries it about and fills the cups. This seems to my own mind to be the best of occasions. And he's reflecting on what the cultural practice of the Greeks would be, namely that education is a festive occasion. It's a feast. There's food being served. They're delighting in the singing, and remember, the singing isn't just narrating; it's delighting the audience with music. Something is being said here about that. Now, remember this: as Christians, when we open the Word of God, it's speaking of God in an eschatological sense, who's inviting us to a messianic banquet. Right? That's the end of the days, and the new heaven and the new earth and the heavenly Jerusalem which comes down. There will be a feast and a celebration. It's a marriage feast. So there's similarities there, and I just draw that to your attention because there's a communal gathering around the Word and the stories therein which have meaning for the lives of the participants. And there's a community, that sense of shared identity that comes from the recounting of these stories. So that's his comment on this. And this seems to my own mind the best of occasions. But now your wish was inclined to ask me about my mournful sufferings, so that I must mourn and grieve even more. So he's asked him to tell his tale, but This is a hard ask, because to tell the story is to relive the suffering that he physically endured. And it's painful to him to even talk about it. See, he's a war vet. He's suffering from what we today would call post-traumatic stress disorder. Like, the term didn't exist back then, but the experience did. He's traumatized. Just think about it. All the friends, dear friends, companions that he's lost. All the years that he has spent away from his family. All those things, that he's not getting those years back. To even speak of them is to cause him pain. But as a guest, he's been asked by the host to tell the story. He has no choice. Guests have their obligations just like hosts do. So now he will have to tell them. He says, many are the sorrows. What then shall I recite to you first of all? What leave till later? This is the author's choice. How do I order the events even? Many are the sorrows the gods of the sky have given me. Now first I will tell you my name, so that all of you may know me, and I hereafter, escaping the day without pity, be your friend and guest, though the home where I live is far away from you. I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, known before all men for the study of crafty designs, and my fame goes up to the heavens. I am at home in sunny Ithaca. There is a mountain there that stands tall, leaf-trembling Neritos, and there are islands settled around it, lying one very close to another, etc., etc. And he is going to talk about how he came from Troy land, line 38, and he tells us this tale. Now, he departs from Troy. He goes to the land of the lotus eaters. The lotus eaters, it's sort of their drug addicts. They're eating the lotus leaf, which causes a sort of loss of memory and so forth. He then goes to the land of the Cyclopes. And that's where I want to pick it up again. Line 172. They come to this land. It's the land of the Cyclopes, we're told, 166. And they were nearby, and we saw their smoke, the Cyclopes, and heard sheep and goats bleating. But when the sun went down and the sacred darkness came over, then we lay down to sleep along the break of the seashore. But when the dawn showed again with her rosy fingers, by the way, that is an epithet, the rosy-fingered dawn. It's repeatedly, dawn has rosy fingers. So you can imagine dawn putting her fingers on the edge of the earth and peeking up her head. And he uses that, Homer does, as a mnemonic device. Remember, he's telling this all by memory. Certain epithets. So the dawn always has rosy fingers. Athena has gray-eyed. She's always called gray-eyed Athena. What's the deal with the gray? Why gray? Is there any significance to the gray? No idea. Exactly. People do speculate on such things, by the way. Is there a universal significance to these descriptions? We do know in terms of poetic recounting, it's useful if you're trying to memorize thousands of lines of poetry to have something that preserves the meter of the telling and also is a characteristic description. But
Sorry.
Go ahead.
What is the definition then of epithet?
An epithet is a short adjective or description related to a character or thing, but it's repeatedly used. So it's gray-eyed Athena, white-armed Hera, crafty Telemachus, Zeus, the father of gods and men. Just over and over, that adjectival phrase is used to describe them. And you can say, could he not come up with something else? Well, he could. But that particular phrase in the Greek language preserves the meter, and it allows him to preserve the meter. Just that. He doesn't need to change the description. So that it is what it is there. But he says that, and he held an assembly and spoke forth before all, says Odysseus. The rest of you who are my eager companions, wait here, while I with my own ship and companions that are in it Go and find out about these people and learn what they are. Whether they are savage and violent and without justice, or hospitable to strangers and with minds that are godly. That's what he needs to discern. Now, civilized people have certain features. And savage people have certain features. The chief one is they lack justice. Do they meet in an assembly, like in a polis, like a city-state? Do they have communal standards? Do they gather together? They have a council? Is there a king that rules over them and follows certain laws? Or are they all lawless and does each do what is right in his own eyes? That's what he needs to know. And the reason he needs to know that is because this is a reality of that world. There are places of civilization, but when you're outside those boundaries, there is no law and order. So to travel is a dangerous thing. Robbers can set upon you, and they will. They're looking for stray travelers. So traveling in the ancient world is not like traveling now. It's a dangerous thing. Women do not travel in the ancient world. Men do, and they do at their peril. Because there are robbers out there. There are people looking to rob you, take your life, take your goods, all of that. Just a reality. So he's told his companions to do this, and they go off, and he chooses the best of his companions, and they go with a goatskin bottle of black wine, sweet wine, because he wants to give this. If he meets somebody, we'll give them some wine, a gift. When you visit, bring a gift. He goes there, and it's sweet wine. He says it's a divine drink. And they go across, they meet nobody. And what do they encounter? They encounter inside of a cave, nothing there, but they find fat flocks, line 216. Inside the cave, and admired everything inside it. Baskets were there, heavy with cheeses. The pens crowded with lambs and kids. They all had been divided into separate groups. The firstlings in one place, the middle ones, and the babies again, all by themselves. And all his vessels, milk pails and pans that he used for milking into, were running over with whey, so for making cheese. So that there's clearly a farmer of some sort here, and he's keeping them in the caves. From the start, my companions spoke to me and begged me to take some of the cheeses. They haven't had cheese in who knows how long. Come back again, and the next time to drive the lambs and the kids from their pens and get back quickly to the ship again and go sailing off across the salt water. His companions want to rob whoever is here. There's nobody here. This is milk, this is meat. Let's take it and go. Odysseus does not listen. He says, but I would not listen to them. It would have been better their way. Not until I could see him. See if he would give me presents. That's what he would expect as a guest. He's gone the risk of traveling. He will be rewarded for it. My friends were to find the sight of him in no way lovely. We built a fire, made sacrifice, helping ourselves to the cheeses we ate, and sat waiting for him inside until he came home from his herding. He carried a heavy load of dried out wood to make a fire for his dinner and threw it down inside the cave, making a terrible crash. So in fear, we scuttled away into the cave's corners. So he sits there, he ignores them, but he knows they're there. And eventually he finally speaks to them. 2:30, 2:52. Strangers, who are you? From where do you come sailing over the watery ways? Is it on some business, or are you recklessly roving as pirates do? Because they're eating his food without asking permission. So there is a problem here. When they sail on the salt sea and venture their lives as they wander, bringing evil to alien people. So he spoke. And the inward heart in us was broken in terror of the deep voice and for seeing him so monstrous. But even so I had words for an answer, and I said to him, we are Achaeans coming from Troy, beaten off our true course by winds from every direction. Across the great gulf of the open sea, making for home by the wrong way on the wrong courses. So we have come, so it has pleased Zeus to arrange it. We claim we are of the following of the son of Atreus, Agamemnon, whose fame now is the greatest thing under heaven. Such a city that he sacked and destroyed so many people. But now in turn we come to you and are suppliants at your knees. Note that he hasn't grasped his knees either, maybe for a different reason than he didn't grasp Nausicaa's knees, this great, huge figure. But he acknowledges that they ought to do this in his words. If you might give us a guest present or otherwise some gift of grace, for such is the right of strangers. Therefore respect the gods, O best of men. We are your suppliants. And Zeus, the guest god who stands behind all strangers, with honors due them, avenges any wrong towards strangers and suppliants. So I spoke, but he answered me in pitiless spirit. Stranger, you are a simple fool, or come from far off, when you tell me to avoid the wrath of the gods or fear them. The Cyclopes do not concern themselves over Zeus of the Aegis, nor any of the rest of the blessed gods, since we are far better than they. And for fear of the hate of Zeus, I would not spare you or your companions either, if the fancy took me otherwise. But tell me, so I may know, where did you put your well-made ship when you came? Nearby or far off? Okay. So now he's shown that he has no fear of the gods, which marks him out as a savage, that he does not recognize Zeus's protection of the stranger, and he is willing to take their lives without fear of such. And then he just asks the question, well, how would you answer? You would do it wisely, and you would not tell him what he wants to know, and Odysseus does not let him know. And so he deceives him. But he does, unfortunately, give away something which is going to cause them great peril. He says that my words were crafty. Poseidon, shaker of the earth, has shattered my vessel. He drove it against the rocks on the utter coast of your country. Now, this is not true. He's made it up. But unfortunately, he's named Poseidon in the tale, and Poseidon just happens to be his dad. So, his lie has now caught him and put him in mortal danger. If his father did this, then he didn't fear the gods, but he did respect his own father, and if he's done this to him, then he can do likewise. So the problem with lying, he cracked the ship against the cliff, it's gone, the wind and the sea took it, but I, with these you see, got away from sudden destruction. So I spoke, but he in pitiless spirit answered nothing, but sprang up and reached for my companions, caught up two together and slapped them like killing puppies against the floor. Took them by the legs and whacked them down. So huge is he. And the brains ran all over the floor, soaking the ground. Then he cut them up limb by limb and got supper ready, and like a lion reared in the hills without leaving anything, ate them, entrails, flesh, and the marrowy bones alike. He's even crunching the bones in his teeth. So a fearsome thing and a horrid scene. We cried out aloud and held our hands up to Zeus, seeing the cruelty of what he did, but our hearts were helpless. But when the Cyclops had filled his enormous stomach, feeding on human flesh and drinking down milk unmixed with water, he lay down to sleep in the cave, sprawled out through his sheep. Then I took counsel with myself and my great-hearted spirit to go up close, drawing from beside my thigh the sharp sword, and stab him in the chest, where his midriff joins on the liver, feeling for the place with my hand, but the second thought stayed me. For there we too would have perished away in sheer destruction, seeing that our hands could never have pushed from the lofty gate of the cave the ponderous boulder he had propped there. They can't get out. If they kill him, there's no way of getting out of the cave. They would starve to death and die. This is not an option for him. The only way out of the cave is if the Cyclops rolls the stone away. So this continues. And he keeps on eating his companion. This is a horrid story. So not only is he does not fear the gods, he's a cannibal. And a cannibal without much in the way of culture. Very rudimentary. He's not even a sower of crops. He has animals in a pen. and he is willing to eat anything that comes across, and he lives by means sheerly of his brute strength. It's not his words, it's not his reason, it's just sheer brute force. That is what makes him stronger than they. So this is a battle between force or nature and techne or craft. This word techne in Greek, from which we get technology, and technique. One of the chief things that Odysseus is known for is his craftiness, his employment of the arts to magnify his strength. It's one of the things that distinguishes human beings from the animals, is that we create utensils. Some people say, oh yes, but birds do this, and so do monkeys and so forth. But they don't craft them and they don't develop them. The birds that use sticks or whatever to create their nests in a fascinating way, there's no development of nests. They don't go from the basic nest that they form to an enhanced nest or a Mark II of the nest. It's the same nest over and over. The bird creates the exact same thing with the monkeys. There's no advancement, there's no desire to do so. Whereas Odysseus and the whole human race does use techne to become godlike. So they use their minds, they use their craftiness, they use their technique to have dominion over the rest of the earth. So it's a distinctive mark of Odysseus. So he uses his mind, and that's how he's going to defeat the Cyclopes here. Yes?
So would there have been a way for Odysseus to word things and not have the same outcome? Would he have been able to get out in any way, or was it kind of
Well, had he known that this was the son of Poseidon, he wouldn't have lied and said it was Poseidon that broke the ship. I don't know if that would have changed the outcome. But it certainly was the worst thing he could have said. Oh, it was Poseidon that wrecked us. And there's enough there for Polyphemus to say, well, if my father wrecked their ship, then that's enough for me. He's angry with them, then I can cope with this. In fact, I'm with him. I'll do exactly what he's done. I can eat them freely. He wasn't afraid of the gods. He probably would have honored his father. So bad choice of lies there. So he could have done that, I guess. But would it have changed things any? Well, we don't know. The story is as it is. Now he's left to use his wiles, his craftiness, his dolos, or remember that we talked about that deceitfulness, which marks him, to get out of this mess. Because now they're in a terrible mess. How are they going to get out of this story? Well, he uses wine. The wine he brought as a gift, he gives it to the Cyclops to make him drunk. Now this is interesting because the wine that is used to make the Cyclops drunk is also used to make Odysseus's men drunk on the island of Circe. Now Circe is a witch. She turns men into swine, makes them subhuman in some ways, and literally turns them into pigs. But in this case, he uses the same trickery that was used on him and his companions, he now uses on the Cyclops to make the Cyclops drunk. And you say, okay, so what? So what happens after this? After he drinks the wine, he gets drunk, and he does get drunk. The wine had gone into the brains of the Cyclops, 362, and then I spoke to him. My words were full of beguilement. Cyclops, you asked me for my famous name. I will tell you then, but you must give me a guest gift as you have promised. Nobody is my name. My father and mother call me Nobody. So do all the others who are my companions. So I spoke. And he answered me in a pitiless spirit. Then I will eat Nobody after his friends, and the others I will eat first. And that shall be my guest present to you. I'll eat you last. He spoke and slumped away and fell on his back and lay there with his thick neck crooked over on his one side and asleep, who subdues. All came on and captured him, and the wine gurgled up from his gullet with gobs of human meat. Oh gosh, he's belching, and the pieces of human meat are coming up with it. Nice picture in your mind's eye. Sorry, just a sec here. This thing is timed out. Of course, I have to sign back in. How infuriating. There we go. And at that point, he is in a blind panic. This was his drunken vomiting. Then I shoved the beam underneath a deep bed of cinders. Now they've taken a beam that was there and they have sharpened the edge of it just to bring out. It was a green branch, and they've sharpened the edge of it because they're going to stick it in the Cyclops. And where are they going to stick it? They're not going to kill him, because to kill him is they can't get out. What are they going to do with it? They're going to blind him. Remember, the Cyclops also has one eye. Now, a one-eyed person has no capacity for perspective. You can see with one eye, but you can't have a sense of perspective. It reflects his brutality, the Cyclops, in some ways. It's fitting for him that he sees and yet does not see. Not sees with the capacity for... There's a new iPhone, by the way. It's got 2 cameras, apparently, and that gives not only a wider length, but also some sort of depth perspective on it. Human eye, we have 2 of them, and that actually has an effect on how we see things. Not all creatures even have 2 eyes, by the way. But never mind. They're going to stick it in his eye. And they stick it in a deep bed of cinders. So they're not just going to stick the sharp point. It's going to be heated up to a point where it is catching fire and glowing, terribly incandescent. We read at the point. And then I brought it up close from the fire, and my friends about me stood fast. Some great divinity breathed courage into us. They seized the beam of olive, sharp at the end, and leaned on it into the eye, while I, from above, leaning my weight on it, twirled it like a man with a brace and bit who bores into a ship timber, so that to dig a hole into it, to put the wood together. And his men from underneath, grasping the strap on either side, whirl it, and it bites resolutely deeper. So, seizing the fire point hardened timber, we twirled it into his eye, and the blood boiled around the hot point, so that the blast and scorch of the burning ball singed all his eyebrows and eyelids, and the fire made the roots of his eye crackle. Epic simile. As when a man who works as a blacksmith plunges a screaming great axe blade or plane into cold water, treating it for temper, since this is the way steel is made strong, even as Cyclops' eye sizzled about the beam of the olive, he gave a giant, horrible cry, and the rocks rattled to the sound, and we scuttled away in fear. He pulled the timber out of his eye, and it blubbered with plenty of blood. Then, when he had frantically taken it from his hands and thrown it away, he cried aloud to the other Cyclops, who live around him in their own caves among the windy pinnacles. They, hearing him, came swarming up from their various places and stood around the cave and asked him what was his trouble. Why, Polyphemus, what do you want with all this outcry through the immortal night, and have made us all thus sleepless? Surely no mortal against your will can be driving your sheep off. Surely none can be killing you by force or treachery. Then from inside the cave, strong Polyphemus answered, Good friends, nobody is killing me by force or treachery. That's his name. Nobody is killing me by force or treachery. So then the others, speaking in winged words, gave him an answer. If alone as you are, none uses violence on you, why, then there is no avoiding the sickness sent by great Zeus. So you'd better pray to your father, the Lord Poseidon. So they spoke as they went away. So he's tricked him. He's blinded him. He has given him a false name, and the false name has also tricked the other Cyclops. So now they have escaped that. Okay, but they're still stuck in the cave. How are they going to get out of the cave? Well, he's blind. So then what they do, to make a long story short, is they strap themselves under, because the sheep still have to pasture and eat, and he still has to keep them alive, so he has to open the cave and let the sheep out. They strap themselves under the sheep, holding on to the sides of the sheep, onto the underside, and he, blind, is touching the sheep as they go out so that the men don't get out, but they get out under the underside of the sheep. So he gives them a false name blinds him and uses his techne, his mind, to overcome the brute strength of the Polyphemus. So it's a famous episode. And of course, up to this point, he has done exactly what Athena would counsel him to do, which is to be deceitful at all times. Trust no one. You don't give away your name. To give away your name is to give away your identity, and when your identity is known, that's a power over you. To name something is to have power over it. So when somebody calls you Four Eyes, it's calling you by something, and it's part of your identity, but it's identifying that whole feature with you, and it's in some ways abusing you. As everyone knows who calls people nicknames or abusive names, Four Eyes, you'd say, well, when you get older, it's like, that's not a very good... But when you're young, if you're called Four Eyes, it's hurtful because you're different than other people, right? So anyway, naming is just to illustrate the power of words. Words have power. They go in deep. They sink into your heart, and you don't forget them. The cruel names that people use of you. Giving away your real name is a different sort of power. Remember, Adam names the animals. It's claiming the nature of the thing. And if you know that, you can also say, this person is under my power. So he gives them a false name, but at this point then, because he's so angry at the Cyclopes, now that he's out and they've rowed away, the Cyclops is on the beach, he says, Cyclops. He calls out, line 474, I called aloud to the Cyclops, taunting him. Cyclops, in the end it was no weak man's companions you were to eat by violence and force in your hollow cave, and your evil deeds were to catch up with you and be too strong for you, hard one, and who dared to eat your own guests in your own house. So Zeus and the rest of the gods have punished you. So I spoke. And still more the heart in him was angered. He broke away the peak of a great mountain and let it fly, and threw it in front of the dark, proud ship by only a little. It just failed to graze the steering oar's edge. But the sea washed up in the splash as the stone went under. The tidal wave it made swept us suddenly back from the open sea to the mainland again and forced us on shore. So maybe that wasn't such a good idea, to taunt him while he was within throwing distance, but who would expect a beast like this to pull off the top of a mountain, throw it, but that's what he did. So now they row away a little further, and he continues this. And here is where his folly comes out. 502. Out of anger, he says, Cyclops, if any mortal man ever asks you who it was that inflicted upon your eye this shameful blinding, tell him that you were blinded by Odysseus, sacker of cities. Laertes is his father, and he makes his home in Ithaca. Now he's revealed his identity. This is the moment when Odysseus is at his utmost folly. It's not time to reveal who he is, to give his identity away. He hasn't got home. If you want to think of an analogy, it's imperfect, but think of how Jesus will not identify who he is until it's time. In the gospel narratives, people don't know who he is. I mean, they know his name is Jesus, but that's not his whole identity. His whole identity is that he is God. He is also the son of the Davidic kingship. All of those things are slowly known, that he's the son of David, in the line of David. They know when it comes to Palm Sunday, when Jesus enters Jerusalem, they know that this is the son of the king, and he's riding on a donkey. This is prophecy. They think, here he comes and he's going to restore the kingdom, and he's going to throw the Romans out, and he's going to establish a military rule, right? So they know who he is in that sense, but they don't know that he is also, even though he's made it plain to them that this is God, and not only that he is God, but God is going to give himself over to death, their death on the cross. That they don't know, and they turn upon him, etc. But it's the right time. He waits. He doesn't want people to, even his disciples, to tell people who he is, because they don't understand his full identity. In the same way here, there's a time in which you are to reveal yourself, but it's not until you're good and ready. Do not give away the game until you are finished. And he will carry this through all the way to the end. So there's something about identity and patience that will have to endure suffering that is associated with wisdom. The type of wisdom that Athena has and Odysseus has as well. But first, remember, so he leaves Troy. He comes to the Lotus Eaters, who make him forget his way home, so he can't get back. Right? How did I get back? The Lotus, the effect of that was for him to lose his memory. Then he goes to Polyphemus, who would eat them. And now he's given away the game, tells who he is. And at that point, then Polyphemus cries out to his father, Poseidon. And Poseidon is beside himself with rage, and he's the one who prevents him from getting home thereafter. Up until this point, where he has now, remember, he's telling this story to the Phaeacians, he's finally got away. And Poseidon's furious, of course, but he's away. But this is why it's taken him so long. Can you turn the light on back there so I can see this, my notes a little better? Sorry. Apologies. Thank you. So he has left there, and he is going to have to get back home. Now, I'm going to skip over a few things. Any comments or questions about this passage? I spent a lot of time on this passage. I arguably shouldn't have spent so much time, but I think it's interesting to read the recounting of the tale. He'll then move on to the Aeolus, the god of the winds. He will move on to the land of the Lystragones, who are giants. Book 10 is the Aeolus's cave. And in Book 10 also we will meet Circe and the enchanting passage, but I will skip over that. But Circe is again a woman deceitful. She uses wine, just as he has done. Right? So there's a parallel being drawn there, and there's something about using evil means to do good. Christians will not accept this. So this is not Christian ethics. You must not use the evil means to achieve good ends, because you will be corrupted in the process. That's not the Greek view. That's not the world's view. You can use whatever means, fair or foul, to get things done. It's pragmatism. The whole Greek philosophical tradition and the Christian position will argue against this. You cannot use falsehood to promote truth. It does not work. You cannot do evil, use evil means to achieve good. It's a key thing. But so he goes into Circe's island, and he gets out of there, and the means of doing that, by the way, I'll just mention this by the by. He brings out something called line, where is it? 332, I think it is. Is that right? No, it's not. Got the lines wrong here. That's a different version. It's to take a drug and a wand. And what is the wand? The wand is made of something called holy moly. You know the phrase in English, holy moly? That's what this is. It's the holy moly. It's a root that is used to deliver him from Circe. You never would have known that. But that's what it's a holy root, and it's used to get Circe to release him. She does. And then he moves. I'll move on, and let's just skip over that. Now, what he needs to do in order to get home, she tells him, the witch, Circe, who is a witch, how do I get home? She says, you have to go down to the underworld to get home. Now, this becomes a feature of the epic Ever Thereafter. Every epic hero, it's not in the Iliad, but it is in the Odyssey. This hero is going to go down to the land of the dead in order to get the wisdom he needs to come home. So in Book 11, we are told the story of how Odysseus goes down to the underworld and arises from that. Now, this makes Odysseus a shamanistic hero. Now, do you know what shamanism is? A shaman is like a witch doctor. It communes with the dead. It's in many pagan cultures. There's somebody who, like a priestly sort of figure that performs sacrifices and reads the entrails of animals or whatever, and has this capacity. So it's a sort of, he is a shamanistic hero in the sense that while he is living, he communes with the dead. But here he literally goes down to the realm of the dead. And when he goes down there, he meets somebody who I will not spend too much time on here, but I will just mention his name because he will become important to us later on. His name is Tiresias. Line 137, 38. It's there in line 90 even. Tiresias the Theban. Book 11, line 90. I just mentioned that. I won't say anything more about it because I'll save it for when we come to the tragedy Oedipus the King, because we meet him there.
Is he also blind?
He is blind. He's a prophet. He's in the underworld. I'll talk more about his nature, his features, when we come to the tragedy. Yes?
So is Oedipus Rex before or after, like, the Odyssey kind of thing?
In the terms of the telling, it's certainly after it. But the story about Tiresias, story surrounding Tiresias and what happens at Thebes, is an ancient story that he's telling. Sophocles tells it in 400, 420 or something like that. I don't know the exact date off the top of my head, but thereabouts. And he's telling an ancient story about a king of Thebes and a terrible event that happened. That event is not told of here. We're just, this prophetic figure, Tiresias, the blind prophet, he is being mentioned. And he shall have to speak to Tiresias. Tiresias, the prophet, who will then tell him what he needs to do at this point. Now, if it won't go unnoticed to you that there's a sort of a Christian typology here, as it were. A man goes down to the realm of the dead and then comes back up. Right? So there are similarities there. He dies in a sense because he goes down to the realm of the dead, but he's not actually dead, whereas Jesus was dead. Right? He was actually put to death. There's no sense of that here. So there are similarities and there are clear differences as well. But he undergoes a sort of a death and then a sort of a rebirth. And the rebirth is that he is given knowledge to know, how do I get home? So he goes down, he comes up. And back in Book 10, Circe referred to Odysseus as dying twice, knowing what he's about to do and what the outcome will be. Well, you'll come out of that. Yes?
So it seems like they really, like a common thread through this story is that they really exalt knowledge, as the main thing, as the most desired. Well, that and fame and the glory of heaven.
But not just knowledge, a sort of divine knowledge. Descent to the underworld is one of the features of every epic. So there's a council of the gods. When we come to the Aeneid, I will list the features of the epic. I haven't spent time doing that here. I will do that when we come to the Aeneid. But an epic hero, well, that's a feature of the epic. Epics have heroes. And the epic hero, part of his epic nature is that he is able to do things that no man otherwise can do, and he goes down to the realm of the dead and he comes back up again, which no man can do. The realm of the dead is the realm of the dead. It's not the realm of the living. Marks out his heroism. And this is perhaps his greatest achievement, arguably. So he goes down there. When he goes down there, he finds his companion Eleanor, who had fallen off Circe's roof. He was drunk. He was up on the roof. He fell off, broke his neck, died. He beat Odysseus to the underworld. How did he get there? Well, he died. That's how he got there. So he meets and he speaks to Eleanor. I won't say anything more about that, but that idea of one of your companions beating you there when you're a living person, other epics will follow the same convention again. So there's a way to get to the underworld very quickly. You die, and then you're right there. Whereas Odysseus has to travel to get there. And so he meets him there and he talks to him. And one of the things he says to them is, when you get out of here, go bury my body. Because I cannot get down where I need to go. I can't cross the river to the underworld until my body's been buried. And there's a torment that is going on until he's been buried. So he asks him to do this, and he promises to do precisely that, and he does do that. He goes back, buries the body, and then goes on. So interestingly, something's being said about the body and about human nature there as well. Not all civilizations have buried bodies. Some burn them. But the Greeks bury their bodies. I could get into that whole topic of, which is a present topic in contemporary life, of whether you bury your body or you cremate it, and all that sort of thing. All of it has to do with your connection between the body of a person and their identity. How tightly are they linked? I have my own views on it, but I won't get into that here just because for the sake of time. But he is breaking the rules of nature by visiting the underworld before he dies, and in here he is going to not just an underworld, it is an anti-world in some ways. It's against, he's coming to the edge of the world, the edge of the known world to the realm of the unknown. The stream of the ocean comes down here. It's a dark and misty place. He also meets different figures. He meets Tiresias, yes, but he also meets Oedipus's mother. He meets Heracles, who had already gone down there. He was a demigod, he went down. Or he's like, rather, Hercules. Hercules is a god who went to the underworld and came back up, but he was a god. This is a man. It's different. He was subject to death, whereas Hercules was not. Now, the ship, by the way, one final comment here. The ship is not, they're not steering the ship. A wind is blowing them down into the underworld. So there's a sort of a divine mission that Odysseus has that the gods are helping along. It's fated that he come here. This is part of his heroism. It's divinely ordained that this should happen. At this point, the gods take over. The breeze blows him down into the underworld. They have no capacity. So we talked about knowledge, but there's no knowledge that leads him here. It's more destiny. He's fated to go down there. It's not of his own free will. He goes down to the underworld. Now, when he gets down there, he has to make a sacrifice. The sacrifice is of blood, which he feeds to the dead, and at that point the dead speak. So there's a connection between blood and life and speech, which we also see in Scripture. A person's life and his blood are connected in some ways. It's a deep connection. When Cain is slain, the Lord says that he hears his blood is crying out from the ground. It's obviously a metonym there, right? One part, but in a sense, it's a consistent pattern. So he meets Oedipus's mother. He also meets Agamemnon. Let me come to that because this is interesting. This is very interesting, actually. That's just one of the things I want to draw to your attention. He meets Agamemnon. Let me come to that first.
This was the man who was betrayed.
This is the man whom we heard right at the outset of the story. The leader of the Greeks who came home was slain by his wife Clytemnestra and her companion, and then avenged. But he's down there and he's going to speak to him. And what does he say? 405. Son of Laertes and seed of Zeus, resourceful Odysseus, not in the ships, how did you die? Not in the ships, nor did Poseidon, rousing a storm blast of battering winds that none would wish for, prove my destruction. Nor on dry land did enemy men destroy me in battle. Aegisthus, working out my death and destruction, invited me to his house and feasted me and killed me there. Now, who does that sound like?
That's the
Polyphemus, right?
right.
A guest, betrayal of a guest. It's a terrible form. It's not just that he murdered his king, he murdered a guest, magnifying the crime. This is how terrific inhospitality. Invited me to his house, feasted me, killed me there with the help of my sluttish wife. as one who cuts down an ox at his manger. So I died a most pitiful death, and my other companions were killed around me without mercy, like pigs with shining tusks in the house of a man rich and very powerful. Again, allusion to the Circe episode as well. This is how he came to his end. For a wedding or a festival or a communal dinner, you've been present in your time at the slaughter of many men, killed singly or in the strong encounters of battle. But beyond all others, you would have been sorry at heart for this scene. How we lay sprawled by the mixing bowl and the loaded tables all over the place, and the whole floor was steaming with blood. And most pitiful was the voice I heard of Priam's daughter Cassandra, killed by treacherous Clytemnestra, his wife, over me. Cassandra the prophetess. At any rate, so he was killed for this, and he says, gives him a warning. 441. Do not be too easy even with your wife, nor give her an entire account of all you are sure of. Tell her part of it, but let the rest be hidden in silence. And yet you, Odysseus, will never be murdered by your wife. The daughter of Icarius, circumspect Penelope, is all too virtuous, and her mind is stored with good thoughts. Ah, well, she was only a young wife when we left her and went off to the fighting, and she had an infant child then at her breast. That child now must sit with the men and be counted. Happy he, for his dear father will come back and see him, and he will fold his father in his arms, as is right. My wife never let me feed my eyes with the sight of my own son, but before that I myself was killed by her. And put away in your heart this other thing that I tell you. When you bring your ship into your own dear country, do it secretly, not in the open. So the need for secrecy and guile and deceit. Here's how you're to come back. There is no trusting in women. But come now, tell me this and give me an accurate answer. Is my son still living, etc.? And then he talks and he responds to that. I will skip over that. You can look at that yourself. He talks about consulting with Tiresias about how to get back. He speaks, and then he is going to speak to another figure. Who is the other figure? Well, the other figure, his name is Achilles. Let me come to that. This is line 487. And this is very interesting. Actually, I'll give you a little bit of a lead up to it. He meets Achilles and his shade. He gives him a little bit of blood to drink, and now he can speak. He tells his story. And Odysseus praises him, praises Achilles. He said, son of Peleus, far the greatest of the Achaeans. Achilles, I come for the need to consult Tiresias, if he might tell me some plan by which I might come back to rocky Ithaca. For I have not yet been near Achaean country, nor even set foot on my land, but always I have troubles. Achilles, no man before me has been more blessed than you, nor ever will be. Before, when you were alive, we Argives honored you as we did the gods. And now in this place, you have great authority over the dead. Do not grieve, even in dead, Achilles. So, he is praising him for his honor. Remember, he died a young death, and Odysseus is greeting him as the greatest of all because of his glory. Right? That's how he greets him. How does Achilles respond? You'd think he'd be pleased by this response. Right? That's what he died for, so that he'd be famous. He's famous. How does he respond? O shining Odysseus, never try to console me for dying. I would rather follow the plow as thrall, that is, as slave, to another man, one with no land allotted him, and not much to live on, than be a king over all the perished dead. Now think about this. The whole of the Greek civic life is established around glory and doing great deeds so that they will be remembered by your fellow mortals. You are going to die. There's no escaping death. The only way you will live beyond your death is to do something so wonderful and good that others will sing your praises. But Achilles, who is the foremost of these great men, says, I would rather have lived a life of anonymity as the slave to another man than have come down here to this place. this is within Homer's story. Homer's story is dependent on the Greek worldview of arete, excellence, being praised for as glorious. But the dead are so miserable that they would rather be living than be there early and famous. So terrible conflict, a terrible sense amongst the Greeks of the lot of humanity in dying, expressed by Homer himself. It's a famous passage. And it's just stated. There's no response there, but there could be a response. It's such a significant moment, I think. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So he goes down, he meets Hades. He also sees the Elysian fields down there, and he sees that there is suffering for the sins of this world down there, but it's in the same place, more or less. We meet various other mythological figures as well. He does meet Tiresias. Tiresias tells him how to get home. He takes his advice. And then up he goes. And at the end of it, the only thing he says is, at the end of your life, take one of your oars and stick it in the ground upright. And that will symbolize the fact where none have ever heard of ships. That will be the end of your voyages. A place where nobody has ever even heard of a ship. You're not going to end up on Ithaca. You're going to go back to Ithaca, your homeland, but that's not where you're going to stay. The end of your days, you're going to go on another voyage. When you get to that place, you're going to go to the end of the world, and you'll stick your oar in the sand upright, and that will be the end of your journeying. So his suffering will not finish. So if you want to think of it like Frodo, because that analogy is clear in, I think, Tolkien's mind, Frodo, even though he comes back to Hobbiton, he can't stay there. He's going to have to keep on voyaging. He's not meant for this world. He's going to go on, right? And others will inherit the blessings of it, Telemachus being the chief of them. So the end of the voyage in the Odyssey is not the end of Odysseus' voyaging. He will go to another, and then he will plant the oar to finish that. Comments or questions? Lots, yes.
How was Eleanor able to speak before because he didn't drink the blood?
Maybe because he hasn't passed over the river into the land of the undead yet. So he's in the in-between. He's dead, but he hasn't passed into the realm of the dead. So he's not, I don't know how he can speak because he's dead, right? So I have no idea. But I guess he still has the blood in him in some sense. It's dead blood, but not. Good question. I have no idea. Does he not drink blood to speak?
Yeah, he's...
Okay. Okay, good. Fascinating. Dead people don't speak either, even if you, right. Yeah, take that up with Homer. This is good observation. But he does have to do this with those that are in the realm of the dead, for sure. But that is an interesting observation. Now, so he will go on there. And now, what we have at this point, so I'll leave it off there and I'll move on then to, so the end of that story, he's telling this story to the Phaeacians, and the Phaeacians, let me come to the conclusion of that. Then he goes, book 12, he comes to tell of the Sirens and Scylla and Charybdis. These are another famous passage, and you can look at this on your own. I won't cover it, but in book 12, lines, where is it? Line 73 and onwards, there are these two figures. One is the Scylla, or often spelled with a C in English, by the way, and Charybdis. He's going to have to voyage between these two. Is it dangerous? One of them is rocks, and the other is this beast that grabs men and eats them. He's going to have to go between the two. He decides he's going to go closer to the Scylla rather than Charybdis. Charybdis will kill them all. The Scylla will take some of them. So he makes the terribly difficult decision that some will die, but some will live. He also encounters the Sirens, who sing a divine song that enchants them and pulls them towards Charybdis. And he wants to hear it. So he says to his companions, tie me up and you stick wax in your ear so you can't hear, because if you hear this, everyone will want to go where the Sirens are, right on Charybdis. But I want to hear it. And he said, whatever I do, however much I plead, whatever, don't untie me, don't let me go. And so they let him hear the song of the Sirens and yet not respond to it. Now, why he would do this, never mind. Like, why? He hears the siren song, he wants to heed it, but he's prevented from doing it again through his wisdom at this point. I'll just pass over that passage, but that's a famous proverb in English. In the Bible, between a rock, or I think it's Shakespeare, between a rock and a hard place. Here it's between Scylla and Charybdis. So he gets through that as well. Then finally he's finished with this account. And so in book 13, back on the island of the Phaeacians, page 198 in your books. So he spoke, and all of them stayed stricken to silence, held in thrall by the story all through the shadowy chambers. Then the king, Alcinous, answered him in turn and said to him, Odysseus, now that you've come to my house, bronze founded with the high roof, I think you will not lose your homecoming, nor be driven back from it again for all your sufferings. Now I lay this charge upon each man of you, such as here in my palace drink the gleaming wine of the princes always at my side, and hear the song of the singer. Clothing for our guests is stored away in the polished chest, and intricately wrought gold, and all those other gifts the Phaeacian men of counsel brought here to give him. Come, let us, man by man, each one of us give a great tripod and a cauldron, and we will make it good to us by a collection among the people. It is hard for a single man to be generous. So they take up an offering collectively, and they give him more wealth than he would have gathered on his voyage. He goes back a rich man. So finally, at the end of all these voyagings, he's lost absolutely everything. Remember, he's lost even his clothing. The Phaeacians are giving him stuff and more stuff. Now, this is all part of his excellence, right? A man's excellence is not only his wealth, but his wealth is a visible sign of it. A poor man can have an excellence of character. We're going to come to that in a minute. It's highly valued by Homer, actually, this excellence of character without wealth. But to have total arete, you have to have it visibly recognized, and that means to be wealthy. And now they give him the wealth. This is a gift, and they will all give this gift so that he can go home and his excellence will be acknowledged by others. But he himself knows that he can't go home and say, I'm home and look at all the goodies I've got. He's been counseled not to do that. So he will hide himself. So everything up to this point is a preparation for the suitors. By the way, Odysseus will meet Athena for the first time now in the narrative, book 13. Let me come to that. I've not got nearly as far as I would have liked to here. Because Athena comes to him and talks to him, and then he lies to her about who he is. He doesn't know it's Athena, but he lies to her. What's her response? Book 13, line 287. The goddess Grey-Eye Athena smiled on him and stroked him with her hand, and took on the shape of a woman both beautiful and tall, and well-versed in glorious handiworks, and spoke aloud to him and addressed him in winged words, saying, it would be a sharp one and a stealthy one who would ever get past you in any contriving, even if it were a god against you. You wretch, so devious, never weary of tricks. Then you would not even in your own country give over your ways of deceiving, and your thievish tales. They are near to you in your very nature. But come, let us talk no more of this. For you and I both know sharp practice, since you are far the best of all mortal men for counsel and stories. And I among all the divinities are famous for wit and sharpness, and yet you never recognized Pallas Athene, daughter of Zeus, the one who is always standing beside you and guarding you in every endeavor. And it was I who made you loved by all the Phaeacians. And now again I am here to help you in your devising of schemes and to hide the possessions which the haughty Phaeacians bestowed. For it was my thought and counsel on you as you started for home, and tell you all the troubles that you are destined to suffer in your well-wrought house. But you must of necessity endure all, and tell no one out of all the men and the women that you have come back from your wanderings. But you must endure much grief in silence, standing and facing men in their violence. So now we have the encounter of Athena, his goddess, who has looked after him, and Odysseus, and she praises him for being a lying, deceiving scoundrel, just like her. A teller of tales. Tales are being connected with deceit. Stories are, by the poet, being connected with deceit. Now, I say this because we are going to come in a couple of classes to Plato's critique of this, that the poets lie and they don't tell the truth, and so they ought not to be the educators of the city. The philosophers should be doing that because they tell the truth. They're concerned with the truth. The poets are not. Homer's own words seem to tell, and there's thereafter a sense that that stories are often deceitful and not wholly truthful. I'll come to that when we come to it, but just to mention this. Now, at this point, Athena brings him back home, and Athena, she helps him. She covers Ithaca with a fog. And even Odysseus can't recognize it because of that fact. And she herself then disguises herself as a shepherd boy. That was this passage. And he tells a lie, and then she goes from being the shepherd boy to the woman. This is who I am. She just wanted to be sure, because he was told, don't reveal yourself, and he hasn't. Okay, well, you continue on with that, and you're going to have to suffer for this. And the suffering is part of his nature as much as his use of techne and skills and crafts and storytelling, and always keeping his head even when all about them are losing theirs. These are all features of this sort of heroism. But above all, you must use your brain. Use your mind. That is what will mark out your heroism. Achilles was a warrior who chiefly used his brawn, Odysseus his brains. So, while this has been happening, I'll set it up for next time and I'll conclude in just a second. The strategies of the narrative. We're preparing for the encounter between Odysseus and the suitors. It's been set up from the very beginning. Remember, Zeus has talked about what happened to Agamemnon, which has been repeated in the stories over and over. The gods are scandalized. They're talking about it in the underworld. It's terrible, and there's a sort of dramatic foreshadowing. Now Odysseus is going to come home, and the same sort of thing could happen, not with one betraying suitor, but with hundreds. What will he do? We already know that he will beat them, because that's been given away as well, but still, the account of it. And Ithaca, in his absence, has become not an underworld, but an inverted world. In the sense that injustice reigns. It is no longer a just place where the gods are honored, where hospitality is done, where people treat one another rightly. In the absence of the king, the suitors bully Penelope, and they feast on his house and drink wine and sleep with the servants and abuse the son. All of these things are happening, and it's become a disordered world. It's marked by the reign of Poseidon, if you will. Anarchy. And Odysseus is going to have to restore the order as a part of his epic journey. That's what we are going to do. But to do that, there's a dramatic irony here. He will have to return in the guise of a beggar, so that he will not be known by his own people. And we will find out that he is good at this in one sense, but there are a few instances, and I'll have to pick them up next time, when his identity is given away. Not by him, but by a feature of him. I'll come to one of those instances next time, but the reason he's going to do this, he's testing them. He's testing them. Are they with me or are they against me? If he comes as Odysseus, of course, they're all going to pretend they're with him, right? Because that's who he is, so they're not going to tell the truth. But if he comes as a beggar, then he'll get under their guard and they will speak to him and they'll see, do these people treat outsiders well? Because he's going to present himself not just as a beggar, but a beggar from abroad. Well, did they treat him with hospitality? And what will he say about what's going on in the house? So he's doing a little reconnaissance before he goes in. This is part of his strategy. Because remember, he's not just killing the suitor, he's trying to restore justice. Doing justice means treating everybody in accordance with what they've done in his absence, whether good or ill. So those who've done well will be rewarded. And that's part of his epic character here as well. I'll come to that next time, though, and we'll get through the rest of it. I will. So books 13 to 24, it's all happening next class. And I shall see you then. And the essay questions will go up tonight, okay? And we'll talk about those. All right?
Thank you.